Don't forget to like the video, share your thoughts in the comments, and subscribe to stay updated with our latest stories. Have you ever had one of those moments? You know the ones I'm talking about. When someone says something so simple, so ordinary, but it hits you like lightning? Not the dramatic kind you see in movies, but the quiet kind that creeps into your heart and changes everything from the inside out. I'm Sarah, and what I'm about to tell you happened on the most ordinary Saturday afternoon. But by the time the sun set that day, nothing felt ordinary anymore. Tom and I have been married for 27 years. 27 years. Can you believe it? We've built this beautiful life together, raised two amazing kids who are now out there chasing their own dreams, created a home that feels warm and lived in, and found that comfortable rhythm that long married couples settle into. Don't get me wrong, I loved our rhythm, most of the time anyway. But if I'm being completely honest with you, sometimes that rhythm felt a little predictable, like a song you've heard so many times that you stop really listening to the words. Not unhappy. No, never that. Just settled. Maybe too settled, and maybe I was too settled as well, though I didn't realize it at the time. Now, let me tell you about David. He's been Tom's best friend since their high school days. You know how men are with those old friendships. David was one of those constant figures in our lives, always there for birthdays, Super Bowl parties, summer barbecues. He was like a piece of furniture you don't really notice until someone points it out. Reliable, comfortable, always in his spot. David is a carpenter by trade, and you can tell just by looking at him. There's something solid about him, something real. His hands are always slightly rough from working with wood, and he has this way of looking at things, really looking like he's studying the grain before he makes his cut. He's quiet, thoughtful, with eyes that seem to catch details most people miss. I'd always found him pleasant, of course, nice to have around, but he was Tom's friend, you understand? Part of the background music of my married life. In all those years, all those gatherings, we'd never really had what you'd call a deep conversation. Why would we? The roles were clear. Tom and David would talk about work, sports, old memories, and I'd float around being the hostess, making sure everyone was happy and fed. That was just how things were. Until they weren't. The day that changed everything was a Saturday in late spring. I remember it so clearly now, like a photograph that's been burned into my memory. It was one of those perfect afternoons that make you grateful to be alive, warm sunshine that kissed your skin without burning it, a gentle breeze that made the new leaves on our big oak tree dance and whisper secrets to each other. We were having one of our impromptu get-togethers. You know how these things happen. Someone mentions it's a beautiful day, a few phone calls get made, and suddenly your backyard is full of laughter and conversation. We had a few neighbors over. Tom's sister had stopped by, and David was there. Naturally, Tom was in his element at the grill, cold beer in one hand, spatula in the other, telling everyone within earshot about some fishing trip from 20 years ago. His laugh was booming across the yard, that big, infectious laugh that first made me fall in love with him all those years ago. I was doing my usual dance between the kitchen and the patio, bringing out bowls of potato salad and chips, making sure everyone's drinks were topped off, checking that the ice bucket was full. It's funny how you slip into these roles without even thinking about it, isn't it? The eternal hostess, always in motion, always taking care of everyone else. But that day, I noticed something different about David. He was quieter than usual, more withdrawn. Instead of joining in Tom's storytelling or the neighbors' debates about local politics, he was sitting on the edge of the patio, slowly sipping a glass of lemonade, his gaze fixed on the garden I'd been pouring my heart into all spring. There was something in his expression, a thoughtfulness, a kind of gentle sadness maybe. I couldn't quite put my finger on it, but it made me pause in my bustling around to really look at him for a moment. Tom was in the middle of his fish story, complete, with wild hand gestures that nearly knocked over his beer, when I caught David's eye. For just a second, our gazes met across the busy patio. He gave me the smallest smile barely there, really, and a tiny nod, like he was acknowledging something I couldn't name. It was such a brief moment, probably lasted all of 2 seconds, but something about it made my heart skip just a little. I smiled back, then quickly turned away to refill the chip bowl, telling myself I was being silly. As the afternoon stretched on, people began to drift away the way they do at these casual gatherings. Work early Monday morning, kids to pick up, dinners to prepare. Tom's sister was the last to announce her departure, giving me a big hug and promising to call during the week. Tom walked her out to her car, his arm around her shoulders, their voices carrying back to us as they made their way down the driveway. And suddenly, the backyard that had been buzzing with conversation and laughter fell into this soft, comfortable quiet. It was just me and David. I started my usual post-party routine, gathering up empty plates and glasses, wiping down the patio table, straightening the cushions on the outdoor chairs. It's automatic, really muscle memory from years of hosting these gatherings. That's when David stood up. Not to leave like I expected, but to help. "Let me get some of those, Sarah," he said, his voice calm and low in the quiet evening air. It surprised me, I have to admit. Tom usually left the cleanup to me, not out of meanness, just out of habit. His friends typically followed his lead. But here was David, stacking plates with careful hands, carrying glasses toward the kitchen like it was the most natural thing in the world. We worked together in comfortable silence for a few minutes. There was something peaceful about it, moving around each other in that easy way people do when they're focused on the same task. But there was also something else, an awareness, a kind of gentle electricity that I'd never felt with David before. Maybe it was because we were truly alone for the first time in all those years of him being part of our lives. Maybe it was the golden light streaming through the kitchen window, making everything look softer, warmer. Maybe it was just that I was finally seeing him clearly instead of as just Tom's friend David. I was wiping down the counter when he spoke again. He was at the sink, his back partially turned to me as he rinsed out a few glasses, and somehow that made his words feel even more significant. "Your roses are really something this year, Sarah," he said quietly. "Now, I get compliments on my garden all the time. Neighbors, friends, the mailman, everyone's always saying something nice about the flowers. But this felt different. There was a weight to his words, a sincerity that made me stop mid-wipe and really listen. "Oh, thank you, David," I replied, trying to keep my voice light and casual. "They took quite a hit with that late frost we had, but I think they've bounced back pretty well." He turned then, leaning back against the counter, and when he looked at me, really looked at me, I felt something shift in the air between us. His gaze was direct but kind, with an intensity I'd never noticed before. Or maybe I just hadn't been paying attention. "They've more than bounced back," he said softly. "They're thriving, just like you." And that's when I knew with absolute certainty that this wasn't going to be an ordinary conversation. My heart did this little flutter, like a bird suddenly taking flight in my chest. It was surprise and something else, a warmth, unexpected and sweet, spreading through me like honey and tea. I didn't know what to say, so I just stood there, dish towel in my hands, waiting. The kitchen seemed to grow quieter around us, not with awkwardness but with anticipation. Those 3 words, "just like you," kept echoing in my mind. Such a simple phrase, but it felt loaded with meaning, heavy with recognition. For so many years, I'd been defined by my relationships to other people. Tom's wife, the kids' mom, Sarah who throws the nice barbecues, Sarah who always remembers everyone's birthday, Sarah who makes the best chocolate chip cookies in the neighborhood. But to be seen as just Sarah, as a person who was thriving in her own right, that was something else entirely. Especially coming from David, who I'd always thought of as more of an observer than someone who commented on personal things. I managed, and this little breathless laugh escaped me. It sounded silly even to my own ears, inadequate for the moment, but it was all I could think to say. David didn't push or make me feel awkward about my stumbling response. He just held my gaze for another long moment, his expression unreadable but not unsettling. It was more like he was giving me space to absorb what he'd said, to process this unexpected recognition. Then he looked away, toward the window that overlooked our backyard. The late afternoon sun was casting these long, dramatic shadows across the lawn, turning everything golden and peaceful. "Tom's a lucky man," he said, his voice still soft but with something else underneath it now. "I've known him since we were 17 years old. He's got a good heart, always has, but he's Tom. Sometimes I wonder if he truly sees everything he has." My breath caught in my throat. This was completely uncharted territory. We were talking about Tom, my husband, David's best friend, but it wasn't gossip. It wasn't mean-spirited or disloyal. It was an observation, spoken with genuine regret, like he was sad about something he'd noticed but couldn't change. I found myself nodding slowly, a truth I hadn't really acknowledged or maybe hadn't wanted to, blooming in my chest like one of those roses we'd been talking about. Tom was a wonderful man. I loved him, truly. I did. But he wasn't. Well, he wasn't particularly detail-oriented when it came to emotions. He loved me in his way. I knew that. But the subtle things, the quiet shifts in my inner world, the small, daily moments that make up a life, those often went unnoticed, lost in the comfortable routine of our shared existence. He's comfortable, I offered, searching for the right words. We both are, I suppose. It's easy to stop looking closely after a while, isn't it? David turned back to me, a faint smile touching the corners of his mouth. Easy, yes, but not always. Best. He paused, and I could see him choosing his words carefully, like he was handling something fragile. I see you, Sarah, he said finally. I see how you pour yourself into everything, this home, your garden, the way you've always made sure everyone feels welcome and cared for. I remember when I used to bring my son Michael over when he was little and so shy he could barely speak to anyone. You had this way of drawing him out, making him feel safe. You have this gift for making things beautiful, for making people feel at ease. It's rare. My eyes started to prickle with unexpected tears. It was so unexpected. These were things I just did, things I thought no one really noticed. Or if they did, they just took for granted. Not that I did them for praise or recognition, but to have them seen and acknowledged by someone, especially someone I least expected it from, it was profoundly moving. David, I started, but my voice came out shaky. He raised his hand, slightly, a gentle gesture that somehow said, "Let me finish. I'm not saying this to make you uncomfortable," he said, his gaze earnest and honest. "Or to criticize Tom. He's my oldest friend, and I care about him. But I've been around for a long time, Sarah. I've watched you both, watched your family grow and change. And I've always admired your strength, your quiet grace, the way you've navigated everything life has thrown at you." He paused again, and when he spoke next, his voice was even softer. "There's a depth to you, a richness that I don't think gets acknowledged enough. I hope you know that. I hope you give yourself credit for all the beauty you bring into the world." The tears I'd been holding back finally spilled over, just a few, sliding down my cheeks before I could stop them. I wiped them away quickly, embarrassed, but also strangely grateful. In all my years of marriage, through all the celebrations and challenges, the daily routines and special occasions, no one had ever spoken to me quite like this. No one had ever seen me with such clarity, such appreciation for who I was as a person, separate from all my roles and responsibilities. And as I stood there in my kitchen, with the golden afternoon light painting everything warm and beautiful, I realized that something fundamental had shifted. Not just in how David saw me, but in how I was beginning to see myself. This was the moment everything changed. Not with drama or fanfare, but with quiet recognition, with truth spoken gently in the fading light of an ordinary Saturday afternoon. And I knew, with a certainty that both thrilled and terrified me, that nothing would ever be quite the same again. Yourself credit for it. He wasn't Leanningan, wasn't making any inward gestures. Hess stood perfectly still, his hands resting lightly on the counter. The respect in his eyes was palpable. It wasn't flirtation. It was something far more profound. It was recognition. I thought of all the years, the quiet sacrifices, the times I'd put my own needs or dreams on the back burner for the sake of the family, Fordham's career, for the children. Not with resentment, not usually, but with a quiet acceptance that this was my role. And nowhere was David, Tom's friend, seeing all those layers, acknowledging the person I was beneath the roles. It was like a parched part of my soul was suddenly being watered. "Thank you," I whispered, and this time the words felt right, filled with the emotion that was swelling inside. That means a great deal to me, David, more than you know." The silence that followed wasn't empty. It was filled with a new understanding, a connection that had been forged in those few quiet minutes in my sunlit kitchen. Tom's footsteps on the path outside broke the spell, his careful, oblivious voice calling out, "Everything all right in here? Need any help?" David's expression didn't change, but there was a subtle shift, a return to a more familiar, neutral demeanor as he turned towards the door. The moment so potent and private was over, or so I thought. Tom came bustling in, full of his usual energy, completely unaware of that profound exchange that had just taken place. "Just finishing up, Tom," I said, my voice surprisingly steady. though my insides felt like they were humming a new unfamiliar tune. David just nodded, a quiet all good directed at Tom. The ordinariness of their interaction, Theacy camaraderie, stood in such stark contrast to the depth of what had just passed between David and me. It was like stepping back into the regular world from a hidden sacred space. As Tom launched into a story about something his sister had said, I found myself looking at David, really looking at him perhaps. For the first time, not as Tom's appendage but as a man in his own right, a man who had just handed me a gift I hadn't even known. I was longing for the gift of being truly seen. There was no coldness in his demeanor towards Menno, no lingering intensity that might betray our conversation. Was simply David, Tom's friend, listening politely, a faint smile on his face. Yet something had irrevocably shifted. It was in the way our eyes met just for a fleeting second, a silent acknowledgement that resonated deeper than words. The rest of the evening passed in its usual way. We ate leftovers for dinner. Tom and David talked about some project they were considering for David's workshop, and I mostly listened, an observer with a newly awakened inner world. I felt different, calmer, yet more alive. The routine of the evening, the familiar cadence of Tom's voice, the comfortable presence of David, it was all the same, but I was experiencing it from a new vantage point. It was as if David's words had polished a dusty window in my soul, allowing me to see myself, and perhaps even my life, with a clearer, more appreciative gaze. When it was time for David to leave, he shook Tom's hand, clapped him on the shoulder, then turned to me. Good night, Sarah. He said, his voice gentle. Thank you for everything. Standard words, the kind of thing anyone would say, but the way he looked at me, the quiet sincerity in his eyes, it carried the weight of our earlier conversation. Good night, David, I replied, and I hoped my own eyes conveyed the gratitude I felt. Drive safe. After he left, Tom yawned and stretched. Good old Dave, he said affectionately. Solid as a rock, that guy. Yes, I agreed, a soft smile playing on my lips. He really is, Tom. Bless his heart was already thinking about what was on TV. He didn't notice the lingering thoughtful in my expression, the slight tremor to my hands as I stacked the last of the dishes. And that was okay in a strange way. David's words weren't about Tom's shortcomings, but about my own self-perception. Laying in bed that night, long after Tom's breathing had settled into the deep even rhythm of sleep, I replayed the conversation in my mind. I see you, Sarah. There's a depth to you, Sarah, a richness. I hope y'all know that. Each word was a bomb. It wasn't about wanting more from David or less from Tom. It was about me, about the Sarah wo had perhaps become a little submerged over the years, a little too accustomed to being the supporting act of it. Hadn't tried to flatter me or to create some kind of inappropriatency. He had simply offered an observation, a reflection of what he saw. In doing so, he had validated a part of me that had been yearning for acknowledgement, even from myself. The unexpectedness of it, the quiet sincerity, deep, abiding respect that underscored his words. That's watch and jedivering. It wasn't a grand dramatis event, but a quiet unfolding, a gentle recognition that resonated with the force of a revelation. I felt a profound sense of ease mixed with a new, quiet excitement. A door had been opened within me, and I was curious for the first time in a long time to see what lay beyond it. The days and weeks that followed that conversation in the kitchen weren't marked by any dramatic external changes. Tom and I continued our life, tunes. We still had barbecues. David still came over, and the dynamic between three of us on the surface remained the same. But for me, everything felt different. It was like the world had been turned up a few notches in vibrancy. I found myself noticing things I hadn't paid much attention to before. The way the sunlight slanted through the Levison, the morning, the intricate patterns in a butterfly's wings, the taste of morning coffee. It was as if David's words had not only made me see myself more clearly, but had also sharpened my senses to the world around me. The biggest change was internal. I started to consciously acknowledge my own efforts, my own small achievements. When I successfully coaxed a new bloom from a struggling plant in my garden, I didn't just think, oh, good. I allowed myself a moment of genuine pride when I managed to navigate a tricky family situation with grace. I recognized my own emotional labor and skill. David's words, I hope you give yourself credit for it, became a quiet mantra. It wasn't about becoming arrogant or self-centered. It was about cultivating a gentle self-appreciation that had been missing. I found myself revisiting old passions I'd let slide years ago. Before the kids, before life got so busy, I used to sketch. Nothing professional, just for me own enjoyment. I'd loved the feel of charcoal on paper, challenge of capturing a likeness or a mood. I unearthed my old art supplies from the back of a closet. The scent of graphite and old paper strangely comforting. One quiet afternoon, I sat in the garden and started to draw one off roses David had admired. My hand felt clumsy at first, unsure, but slowly a familiar pleasure began to flow. It wasn't about creating a masterpiece, it was about reconnecting with a part of myself I'd neglected. My interactions with Tom changed too subtly. I didn't bring up David's specific words that felt to pervade a gift meant just for me, but I found myself being more open with Tom about my own feelings, my own needs, in small ways instead of just quietly handling everything. I might say, Yauk, no, I'm feeling a bit tired today. Could you maybe handle dinner? Or if I was excited about something I'd read or learn, I'd share it with more enthusiasm, not worrying if he was truly interested but sharing it for the joy of it. And surprisingly, he often responded positively, perhaps sensing a new quiet confidence in me. He even commented on evening, "You seem happier, lighter." I just smiled and said I am. The next time David came over, I felt a quiet warmth towards him, a gratitude that needed no words. Our interactions were normal, friendly, but when our eyes met there was that flicker of understanding, that shared knowledge of a moment that had, for me at least, been transformative. He never brought it up, and I was grateful for that. His gift had been given, and its power lay in its quiet sincerity, not in any need for further discussion or acknowledgement. Had simply held up a mirror, allowing him to see a reflection of myself that was more beautiful, more capable than Theon I had grown used to. That one conversation didn't magically solve all of life's little problems or erase the everyday realities of a long-term marriage, but it did something far more important. It awakened my sense of self. It reminded me that even in the comfortable routines, in the familiarities we play, there is always room for personal discovery, for a renewed appreciation of who we are. David, Tom's quiet friend, had, with a few careful words, reminded me of my own worth, my own thriving. And that, I realized, was a truly profound and beautiful thing. It wasn't about an external validation I needed to seek constantly, but an internal wellspring I could now tap into myself. The world hadn't changed, but I had, and that made all the difference. I was more present, more engaged with my own life, and that sense of inner richness, unseen, continued to grow day by day.